Welcome today to Coffee with the Candidates. We have Ryan Cwach with us here today. He is a current District 18 House Representative for us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nancy.
So why don't you go ahead and start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, my name's Ryan Cwach. I've been the state representative here in Yankton County in District 18 for the last 4 years. I'm running for re-election. I grew up on a family farm just about 3 miles north of town. I get asked all the time what Cwachs I belong to. My parents are David and Tracy. My mom's a nurse at Majestic Bluffs, and my dad's a farmer. My wife and I are both attorneys, and we have a little law practice in downtown Yankton. We recently purchased and acquired the old KYNT building, and we just had our first child, Sloan, who's about 4 months old.
Well, wonderful. It's always interesting when you add a new baby into the household, how that changes the dynamics for sure.
Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead and tell us what skills you have that differentiate you from the other candidates?
Yeah, well, for me, what I've really focused on the last 4 years is just working really hard. And so I think I actually am a hard worker. I think I'm transparent. I work really hard to try and get myself out in front of the community and learn what's going on. And then the other just advantage that I think I have is just that being an attorney, I wake up in the morning, I love this stuff. I read about policy books, then I go and I practice law, and then I go at my job, and then I go home and campaign. And this is kind of just what I live and breathe, for better or for worse.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that as far as what it takes when you're actually up in Pier to stay kind of up to date on everything that's happening? Because a lot of information is thrown at you very quickly.
Yeah, and sometimes, it can be really difficult. And so, a typical day in the legislature is you have your committees in the morning, and then you have your session in the afternoon, and there's about a 3-hour break in between. And so for me, that time after session, which usually ends between 3 and 4, I go back to my desk or I go home, and basically I start researching and preparing for the next day. And sometimes that can go till 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And so they can be really, really long days. Plus you have some social events that you have to try and squeeze in there too. And especially if someone from Yankton comes up to Pier, I want to try and get out to those.
So could you tell us what you think the biggest challenge is during this legislative session?
Yeah, the 3 things that I'm hearing that are really coming to mind for people are affordable childcare. If people are working families or have kids, the healthcare cost, and cost of healthcare insurance, and then long-term care continues to be just an issue that I think more and more people are getting concerned about, and the legislature hasn't done enough to make it a priority.
So let's talk a little bit more about childcare. It really is a crisis here in South Dakota. So what ideas would you support to create growth in that business sector? I know you had brought some legislation last year. Are you planning to do that again this year?
Yeah, so I'm actually the only legislator in the entire state that's brought any sort of bill to try and address our daycare problem. And so, what I brought last year was actually to provide a real estate tax incentive for individuals, existing and new in-home daycare providers. And I proposed that idea for a couple of reasons. Number one, I thought it would work. Number two, in-home daycare is the cheapest form of daycare typically. You don't have to build a bunch of new buildings, and your labor is already there. And it's, the results of it for kids can be really positive if you have a really good in-home daycare provider. So I am going to bring that legislation again. I just threw that idea out there after talking with my wife, who did her whole college thesis on childcare, and she actually said that's what a lot of other countries, really push for. Is the in-home daycare, and it just kind of made sense to me. And so it got to the House floor. It was a close vote, and I'm going to keep working on that. And I think we need to look at other options too, whether that's maybe expanding the voucher program that we currently have in the state to try and make daycare a little bit more affordable for people.
Yeah, the governor last year during her address the budget address had $100 million that was supposed to go towards daycare. And I know 40 million of that did get allocated to existing daycare, so it really didn't provide opportunities for new growth in that industry. So I hope that the governor, when she comes forward with her plan, has some similar dollars allocated with a plan that we can hopefully within all communities, large and small, expand daycares.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So what are your priority areas within the budget?
Yeah, my two priorities for the budget, number one is going to be education, and then specifically kind of focusing on teacher pay. We're 50th in the nation, and I've just talked to so many people in this community where our education system is really valued and really important to them. So I think we need to make sure that our education funding is stable and adequate. And then the second thing would probably be if the voters approve Medicaid expansion. Most of that money is going to result in your tax dollars coming back from the federal government into the state of South Dakota, but the state will have to contribute some funds. So those will be my two budgetary priorities. And state employees too. We have a real wage and benefits crisis with our state employees.
And the Medicaid expansion is also on the ballot this November. All right, wonderful. I just wanted to remind the voters of that so they can become educated on that topic as well. So do you have any suggestions regarding how to grow transparency within our state government?
Yeah, transparency is really difficult. One of the things I've noticed in peers, it's really far away. It's a 3.5-hour drive, and it's tough for people to keep up. For me, what I've done is I've focused on just being honest and open. I go back to the impeachment committee of the Attorney General, which I was on. Our committee internally had a big debate about when and whether we should release the files. And my feeling was that we should just release them right away. Because I looked through them and there really wasn't any reason not to have that information out there. But the majority of the committee felt, well, no, we need to keep this private until a later time. And so what ended up happening is the committee was being accused of hiding information, billboards even went up. And so that was just an example of, I think, politicians overthinking it and not trusting the public. And I wish, if we had done that from the beginning, we would have had a more transparent thing. We would have had the benefit of the public, looking at that file and providing information to us too.
So let's talk a little bit about sports gaming. Which is currently available here in South Dakota, out in Deadwood. Would you support modifications that would allow utilization of online betting, such as an app or something through your phone, so you could make bets anywhere within the state of South Dakota?
Yeah, so right now only the city of Deadwood can have sports gambling, right? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Right now, my feeling is that the voters approved the specific sports gambling package and how it was written, and that when the voters have spoken on something, it's not really appropriate for the legislature to speak on that topic. And so that's a question that I think should be resubmitted to the voters if that's something that individuals in the state think needs to happen.
So at this time, there's about 700 jobs open in Yankton County and about 30,000 across the state. How aggressive should the state be in recruiting new Americans, or actually people from anywhere in the U.S., into South Dakota?
Yeah, well, I think over the last few years, we've seen a large influx of people into the state. For our community and for our state, I think it's important that regardless of where people are coming from, that we continue to be a welcoming state and an open state to people. And then I think what the legislature can do to help with those issues is actually tackle some of the things we've already talked about. We have a daycare problem. It makes it hard for employers to recruit when their employees have a sick kid and are unable to come in, or they don't have reliable daycare. And then, affordable housing is another issue that I think the legislature could step in to provide some incentives to create some more housing for, employees to move into communities like Yankton.
And we do have another question a little bit about housing, but I want to touch a little bit more about immigrants, refugees, asylees coming into South Dakota. Do you feel that there should be a state agency or someone who's helping manage that process, or do you think it's best left in the hands of the nonprofits?
I think it's probably best left in the hands of the nonprofits. You know, immigration is something I'm hearing a lot about. It's a federal issue, and it's not something where I think states should really, constitutionally can't be overly involved. And you know, I think Lutheran Social Services up in Sioux Falls has done a good job of placements and welcoming people into all of our communities across South Dakota.
You are right. Lutheran Social Services has been doing a great job in South Dakota. So how do you plan to work with your fellow elected officials and lobbyists with all the strong opinions on both sides of an issue?
Yeah, so the last 4 years, we've certainly had some legislative bills that have been hot topics. Some are controversial. You know, when I'm up there, how I practice it, you know, my legislative work is I really just try and focus on, you know, what's the problem that we're trying to solve here and what's the best way to solve it. Not so much what's the most politically expedient or best way to do it. And I think from my standpoint, when you come into every discussion from that perspective, you start to earn the respect of your colleagues and they start to trust you. And despite being in the minority party, I do feel like I have that trust with those in the majority party, in that I'm someone who shoots straight, who's honest and open, and I'm you know, focused on just trying to get the solution solved, not necessarily have it be my solution, but get something done so we can, you know, have a result.
So you talk about the relationship you have. Can you remind the voters how long you have already served District 18?
Yeah, so I've been up there for 4 years, and I've been on pretty much every large committee. I was on the redistricting committee, which was very heated, and despite being in the minority party there, I helped broker, you know, a compromise between everybody. I was on the impeachment committee of the Attorney General. Again, I think I was appointed to that because I've shown to the majority there that, you know, I work really well with everyone involved.
All right, so how would you communicate with your constituents to get input on the initiatives and the things that are happening in Pierre?
Yeah, so communication with constituents is very important to me. Number one, if I get an email or a letter from someone in Yankton County or District 18 now, I always respond. I try and do it promptly too. And so during session, that's something that's important to me to do. You know, outside of session, you know, I do a number of things. My campaign is heavily dedicated to just talking to people one-on-one, learning about what issues are important to people. So I spend a lot of my days right now in the campaign doing that. So I can kind of get a sense of what's important to our district. And then the other thing I've done over the years is I've actually created online surveys, and I've even spent my own money to promote those surveys across the internet so people can tell me just in a quick 5-minute survey, you know, what's important to them. You know, there's a small group of us up there who say every day, you know, vote your conscience and then vote your district. And so all those things is to help me, one, understand my conscience, because we all play a part in that, and then to understand my district.
And understanding your district, now that we have changed District 18 to expand outside of Yankton County, does include Wakanda. So we want to thank our Wakanda voters out there who are listening to this and participating in their new district of District 18.
Yeah, I went out to Wakanda, and Irene, half of Irene is in our district, not the other half. I was out visiting with voters out there just last week.
All right. So I do want to say we do have some coffee here. I apologize for that being late.
Nancy.
It feels like it's a little bit warm, so just be careful on that as well. So moving on to housing, as I said we would get back to. Last year there was $200 million dedicated to housing. That all went to South Dakota Housing to administer, and they have been administering $50 million of that for sewer infrastructure projects across South Dakota. But there's another $150 million that was held up by some legislative rules. What do you think can be done to help get that $150 million actually out to the communities this year?
Yeah, so I actually had a long conversation with the South Dakota Housing Development Authority yesterday, and unfortunately, I don't know that there is much that can be done before the next legislative session. My phone call was actually very frustrating, and so for the people listening, housing was the controversial topic of the last legislative session. We spent multiple days working on one bill to try and get more affordable housing into the state of South Dakota. We got it passed. It was by one vote, and it provided $150 million to the Housing Development Authority. Well, now politics has entered into the fray, where quite honestly, Governor Noem raised some questions about the appropriateness of that money going there into this fund. And the Housing Development Authority has felt frustrated that they don't feel there's enough guidance in the legislation of what to do. The reality is the legislature appropriated $150 million to the Housing Development Authority to put towards infrastructure. The Housing Development Authority, I think, is a little nervous to use that money. The Housing Development Authority also was told that they have rulemaking authority, and how they create this program was going to be left to them with legislative oversight. Instead of doing that, which they're mandated to do by law, they're kind of choosing to not do anything, which is unfortunate, because if they would have started when they were supposed to, a lot of these projects could be going already, and they might have actually, a lot of these projects might have had avoided all this inflationary pressure that we now have.
Yeah, so as far as District 18 goes and how we take a look at housing, we really want to keep that $150 million in housing. So if it has to come out of the South Dakota Housing Development Authority and another government entity manages the funds, if that's what has to happen, District 18 would support that. We just want to make sure those dollars can be allocated to the community so we don't miss another build season. So that's really important.
Yeah.
And we are continuing to talk with all of the legislators across South Dakota about how important that money is to get into the hands of the communities.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is the bureaucrats at the Housing Development Authority need to do their job, and I made that clear. I told them very frankly, I spend hours and hours working on this legislation, and it's offensive to me. It hurts my feelings that they're just choosing not to do anything when they're legally mandated to.
And they do have their own governing board for staff up there as well. So let's switch topics to marijuana. Yankton opened its first medicinal dispensary within city limits. What are your thoughts on recreational dispensaries?
Yeah, so I have two thoughts on recreational marijuana as it relates to me personally and as a legislature. Number one, I am going to vote for IM 27. I think recreational marijuana is something that would benefit the community. But number two, and the state, number two is I'm going to follow the will of the voters when it comes to my legislative work. So if the majority of the voters disagree and think that recreational marijuana is not something that the state needs right now, I won't support any recreational marijuana legislation up there. Now, if the voters do approve that, IM 27, then it really falls on the legislature to create some rules and how we're going to do that. And I was actually one of the 6 legislators charged with coming up with the medical marijuana rules or approving them. And I think we actually did a really good job. And when I tell voters how detailed that program is, and it's truthfully when marijuana seed is planted, it gets a number, and that number follows that plant all the way to its sale. And then the number expires at that point. It's a really highly regulated industry, and it's something that I think our rules are good. They have resulted in it taking a little bit longer, but I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, especially now that we're getting up and going. And so I want to see us create some types of rules like that, and 2, also put it in local control. So that while that may be the state law, local entities have the option to decide whether they want to allow dispensaries in their communities or not.
So as you mentioned, IM 27 will be on the ballot this November as well, so we encourage the voters to do their research on that topic as well. So is there anything you wanted to share with the voters that was not a part of the previously asked questions?
You know, I'll just say I've appreciated representing District 18 for the last 4 years. I'm excited to have Wakanda and Irene into our district and getting to know people out there more. It's been a real pleasure, and I'd appreciate your support for my reelection in November.
So as a reminder, voting day is Tuesday, November 8th. Absentee voting is already open, so you can go and place your vote. And also as a reminder, there are 2 spots available to represent District 18 in the House. Candidates running for those spots are Jay Williams, Ryan Cwach, Mike Stevens, and Julie Auk. Thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us today.
Thanks, Nancy.